Welcome to the world of Cistercian monasticism. This disc has been worked out as a cultural encyclopedia and an archaeological guide to the majestic site at Villers in Brabant. You are now in the central part of the program, to which we have given the appellation cloister. From this place, you will start hours of program we have made for you. The cloister gives access to the three main parts of the program that we have called themes, guided tour and direct access. You have selected the presentation from this generic screen, and you may also leave the disc. To select one of the possible approaches, place your cursor on one of the cloister exits and press button 1 on your remote control. The chosen themes represent the encyclopedic part of the program. They will lead to the discovery of the Cistercian skyline all over Europe and even beyond. Starting from the generic screen, you may show an interest in the order or in Cistercian architecture, as well as in the history of Villers in Brabant. Each of these sections proposes several audiovisual sequences introducing aspects as varied as moral discipline, history, aesthetics, and daily life of the Cistercians from the very beginning up to the present times. At any time, you can set a sequence on temporary stop by pressing button 2 on the remote control. If you click on the credit button, you will get all the information about the picture shown on the screen. If you press button 2, the sequence will go on from where it had stopped. To skip a sequence and get to the following menu, press button 1 on your remote control. You will find during your visit that the audiovisual sequences are more often than not followed by catalogues of pictures that you can examine in every way. You may switch the menu by clicking on an image. You will have noticed a certain number of symbols at the bottom of the screen. These will reappear right through the program. The question mark is an important help to explain how to move on the disc. The map shows your position on the disc. The up arrow enables you to return to the preceding menu, and the cloister symbol immediately sends you back to the main menu. Finally, the right and left arrows in sequences of detail enable you to look through the catalogues forwards and backwards as you wish, whereas the picture photo credit gives you full information about the picture shown on the screen. The guided tour will enable you to discover the site at Villers in Brabant down to its smallest detail. Starting from the generic screen, you may be interested in the geography of the site, in its medieval developments, in its later extensions, or finally in its outlying properties. Like the chosen themes, each of the sections gives you access to many audiovisual sequences that aim to show you every building or group of buildings. To enter a building, all you need to do is click on its plan or on its reconstitution, as the case may be. The catalogue of pictures you will find in this part of the program shows the most interesting objects in the site, as well as objects and furnishing relating to it. Running through these sequences is done in exactly the same way as for the themes part. Direct access, as the name indicates, aims at making it easier to consult and understand the sequences. The part Index allows for immediate consultation of a particular part of the themes and of the guided tour. To do this, simply click on the desired topic. This index is accompanied by a bibliography per theme, a plan section, and a glossary.
One of the greatest 12th century historical events in the Christian Middle Ages was the birth and rise of the Cistercian order in the West. Its lightning development was due to the new and attractive spiritual pattern it proposed. The Benedictine order was an extremely well-structured organization at Cluny Abbey, where it had been reshaped. One monk, Robert, left Cluny to found a new house at Mollem in Champagne. The community was to live a monastic life of saintly purity, strictly applying the rule of Saint Benedict. The reform was so successful that 15 years later Mollem found itself at the head of many houses where the monks lived after the manner of Cluny. From 1098 on, Robert and a few friends left Mollem to apply their ascetic ideals elsewhere. They built the new monastery south of Dijon. Shortly after, it was called Citeaux, probably because of the firs or cistals that covered the nearby ponds. The first years at Citeaux were probably difficult ones. Robert left Mollem to return to Cluny and was succeeded by Alberic. In 1109, Stephen Harding, an English monk, was elected abbot of Citeaux, and he firmly imposed the principles of austerity and reform. This saintly, learned man wrote the Chart of Charity, which became the basic spiritual text for observance of the reforms. He also raised donations for the abbey and had a scriptorium built. Many illuminated manuscripts of rare beauty are preserved here. A decisive element in explaining the further development of the new order occurred in 1112, when Bernard de Fontaine, a young Burgundian nobleman, so legend says, arrived with some 30 postulants, all relatives, to increase the numbers at the monastery. From then on, the Cistercian reform spread like lightning. New houses had to be built. La Ferté in 1113, Pontigny in 1114, Clairvaux and Morimont in 1115. About 40 years later, Citeaux was at the head of some 340 abbeys built all over the Western Christian world, and, as has been written, the world was in danger of becoming Cistercian. The spiritual ideal, the economic pattern of Citeaux were particularly well suited to certain aspirations of 12th century society. To stem the breathtaking flux, Citeaux adjusted an original organization based on the principle of parenthood so as to maintain spiritual and material observance. Every new monastery or daughter abbey was controlled by the foundation mother house. The abbot of Citeaux organized a yearly meeting, namely the general chapter, a kind of parliamentary sitting, grouping all the abbots of the order in order to take stock of existing conditions and to specify the common legislation. This formula was to become more and more complicated as the order grew. The abbots of the 4 early daughter houses of Citeaux, La Ferté, Pontigny, Clairvaux and Morimont, embodied a college of peers who were to select a law specialist called definator. From 1202, the statutes or written decisions of the central chapter were codified. In 1250, the order had no fewer than 647 houses for men, more than half from the Clairvaux filiation. The precise number of houses for women has not yet been discovered. The incontestable figurehead of the 12th century Cistercians was Bernard de Fontaine, better known as Saint Bernard, abbot and founder of Clairvaux in Champagne. His attractive and radical message inevitably made him a star on the fourth stage of Christianity until he died in 1153. Firmly convinced of the superiority of Christian observance, he was a formidable preacher and tireless traveler, as well as a humble pastor. He saved the church from a schism, preached the Second Crusade, and was active in all matters of his time. He was a prolific writer too. Among his works, his sermons on the Song of Songs, his Apology, and his treatise on Consideration deserve mention. The polemics with contemporary theologians, the most famous of these his controversial discussions with Abélard, made him many enemies. St. Bernard's personality cannot be dissociated from the rise of the Cistercians, so much so that he outshone the founders of the order. In it he found comfort, the spiritual absolute, devotion to Our Lady, and even artistic perfection. Our life is one of subservience, humility, voluntary poverty, obedience, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. It submits to one master, to one abbot, to one rule, to one discipline. It means putting into practice silence, fasting, keeping vigil, exercising prayer, and manual labor. Above all, it means following the most exalting of ways, which is the way of charity. That's how St. Bernard defined the spiritual ideals of the early Cistercians in his letter 142. Their quest for the absolute, for authenticity, was expressed by their eagerness to rediscover and observe the rule of St. Benedict. So the latter constitutes the fundamental text for the Cistercians, whose reform rejoins the Christian monastic tradition. The monks pledge themselves to a life under one rule, under one abbot. But further texts, historical, legislative, and liturgical, were soon added to the basic rule. During the abbacies of Robert de Molesme and especially of Alberic and Stephen Harding, the composition of a story about the origins of the new monastery was started, as well as the codification of the first principles of Cistercian law. The most important among these texts are the little exordium, the chart of charity, the Cito exordium, the Ecclesiastica Officia, and the chapter general Statuta. Besides the former, the spiritual writings of St. Bernard of Clairvaux and of Blessed Alred of Rilvaux, Guéric of Igny, and Guillaume of Saint-Thierry, often called the four evangelists of Cîteaux, deserve to be mentioned. These were the men who, as early as the 12th century, laid the theological foundations of Cistercian reform and spirituality. Even today, monasticism, heir to Cîteaux, finds its classics in them. The Cistercians are an enclosed order. They live in communities guided by an abbot and may only leave the abbey on exceptional occasions. Moreover, while receiving guests and pilgrims is an integral part of a monk's life, it does not allow him access to the guests' quarters and the church built specially for them. Furthermore, from very early times, Cistercians welcomed among their members men to whom they entrusted the management of their agricultural concern. They were the lay brothers and usually belonged to a lower class of society. Though completely regarded as religious, they nevertheless led a life clearly distinct from the monks. Their job was to see to physical tasks and work in the outbuildings or barns. The Vatican II Council, prepared and followed by recent reforms, abolished the distinction between monks and lay brothers. However, it should be kept in mind, for many of the 12th and 13th century architectural features directly result from this distinction, particularly when it comes to the disposition of the various buildings around the cloister. Monastic life, wholly spiritual and inward, devised a timetable aimed at equitably sharing out the monks' various activities. Physical exercises such as manual work, silence, fasting and keeping vigil alternated with exercises more directly concerned with spiritual life, such as prayer, reading or meditation. So while constantly endeavoring to keep the silence, which ensures an atmosphere of contemplation essential to inward life, the monk devoted some of his time to manual work, to which the Cistercians have given back its sanctifying value, and some of his time to prayers. He would go with the whole community to the choir to celebrate the Eucharist every day and sing the psalms to praise the Lord 7 times a day. Later, he would read the Holy Scriptures, or Lectio Divina, and find a passage in it to use as a subject for meditation or solitary prayer. The priority given to the spiritual is also expressed through their simple and sober life, voluntary and conscientiously cultivated in every sphere, from the vegetarian diet to the characteristic lack of ornamentation in their architectural surroundings. In the same spirit, the first Cistercians chose to wear an untinted woolen habit, which explains their nickname, the White Monks. Even today, every time they go into the church to celebrate a divine service, Cistercians put on the wide white cowl that covers a tunic of the same color, and a scapula or strip of black woolen material that covers shoulders, chest and back. A leather belt and sandals complete their habit. Through hard work and community life divided between daily chores and liturgical ceremonies, Cistercian monks have endeavored to establish a real school of charity, of which Christ is both the master and the ultimate goal. The 12th century Cistercian works of art still constitute a fascinating aesthetic reference today because of their purity, their lack of ornamentation, and their precision. These qualities stand out not only in their architecture and sculpture, but but also in their music, manuscripts and stained glass windows. All of these make up a perfectly coherent unit which cannot be dissociated from the ascetic Cistercian moral doctrine. St. Bernard was the main influence in bringing about aesthetic reform for the first Cistercian generation, and Abbot Etienne Harding, in particular, favored a very different kind of art. This is borne out by the luxurious, richly illuminated manuscripts produced for him at the Cîteaux scriptorium. The reform he applied to music didn't deviate much from the traditional, much ornamented Gregorian chant. Etienne's death in 1134 left the field clear to St. Bernard's expected lack of ornament. His influence was so great that it's no exaggeration to talk of Bernardine aesthetics. In his writings, the many quotations about art are always closely bound to the reforms of morals and spirit. In his famous Apology to Guillaume de Saint-Thierry, Bernard violently attacks the vanity of sculptured figures, so typical of Romanesque art. Ah, but what are they doing there, in front of the brothers engrossed in reading? Those grotesque figures that make one laugh, those beauties so surprisingly monstrous, those monsters so surprisingly beautiful. And what are those obscene monkeys doing there, and those fierce lions, and those monstrous creatures? In short, there's a variety of shapes and forms everywhere, so that one would rather read the marble than the books, and spend the whole day studying those figures one by one, rather than meditate on God's law. Generally speaking, Bernard denounces everything pleasing to the senses, everything that might detract attention from prayers, any ornament or sign of wealth contrary to the spirit of poverty. Alred de Rilvaux advises, "Find glory, find contentment in your heart and not in exterior matters, in real virtue and not in paintings or pictures." Hugues de Foulois goes further. Stone is useful for the structure of the building, but why sculpt it? Genesis must be read in the Bible, not on a wall. Except for the important Treaty on Chant, Cistercian aesthetic reforms were not defined by theoretical norms. The reform participates in the general spirit at the very heart of the order and shows up like a watermark through all the achievements it engendered. By comparing the buildings that have been preserved, historians have been able to extract their rules for organization and aesthetics. Beyond the Cistercian world, 12th century art was going through the prodigious transition from Romanesque to Gothic and was building its first great cathedrals. No ornament was too elaborate for them, as they were a hymn to the glory of God. In this context, Cistercian orientation was resolutely divergent. Nevertheless, uneasily at first, their art finally opened out to the new ideas. As early as 1152, and again in the 13th century, the general chapter codified a certain number of prohibitions that reveal how much abuse there must have been. For example, builders were reminded that glazed windows in church should be untinted, that no tower was allowed, and that illuminations should be monochromic. At the beginning of the 13th century, the spirit of St. Bernard was still very much felt, but the Cistercians rather hesitantly followed the general evolution in art. Soon, nothing distinguished their art from any other. They produced representational stained glass windows, introduced organs and paintings into their churches, and allowed sumptuous burial monuments in their cloisters. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Cistercians didn't hesitate to call in the best artists and architects when the Baroque and Classic styles were all the fashion. The reconstruction of abbeys in the 19th and 20th centuries was often done with slender means and rarely produced artistic masterpieces. The vast rebuilding of Orval was one certain exception and shows a real concern for aesthetic coherence. It took the liturgical reforms that preceded and followed the Second Vatican Council to see buildings appear that express the simplicity and purity of early times in resolute present-day terms. The golden age of the 12th century Cistercian order lasted right through the 13th century, but erratically, depending on the countries it settled in. As a matter of fact, though the building of new monasteries slowed down in some places, the order reached its apogee in others, like in Portugal or Central Europe. In the 13th century, they assumed their final form thanks to an intensive building or rebuilding campaign, from then on in the Gothic style. Cîteaux succeeded in adapting itself to the great evolution in Western society and to the consequences arising from the birth of the new Franciscan and Dominican orders. That house in Bernard's College was founded in Paris in 1224 to enable the monks to perfect their education in a university milieu. From the 14th to the 17th centuries, an era of structural and fortuitous trials affected the order. Some historians speak of decadence, but this is undoubtedly exaggerated. The fact is, the international universality of the general chapter, which was Cîteaux's strong point, slowly gave way to an ever-growing assertion of specific nationalities and to the development of more or less independent regional congregations. Society was changing, distinct nationalities were taking shape, and this led to the first serious conflicts like the 100 Years' War between France and England. Terrible epidemics of plague wrought havoc in Europe from 1347 onwards. Even the Church was disturbed by the Great Schism of the West. In this context of divisions, abbeys were sacked, monastic and especially lay brothers' vocations were in decline, which affected the whole agricultural system of the order. In spite of enormous material and financial difficulties, a fair number of monasteries succeeded in maintaining the standard of their spiritual life. The Protestant Reformation split the Church and Western society all through the 15th century and violently attacked monastic orders. All the abbeys in England were confiscated and destroyed in and after 1536. More than half the German houses were suppressed. Wherever religious wars were raging, monks and nuns were evicted and convents were sacked. Even Cîteaux was looted 4 times. Elsewhere, many abbeys were put under command. That is to say, their abbots were no longer elected by the community, but by the political authorities. Logically, the order should have ceased to exist. The fact that it outlived all these tribulations only goes to show its genuine spiritual vital force, marked by tentative monastic reforms, some of which were to prove successful. These are distinguished by a strong desire to return to the observance of the early days. From From 1577 onwards, the Feuillants congregation experienced a time of vigorous development in France, encouraging other reforms, such as Port-Royal in the 17th century. A real war of observances broke out, opposing supporters and opponents of reforms in the very heart of the order. The most hopeful undertaking for the future was that of Abbot Rancé as early as 1664. His reform at the Trappes monastery in Normandy was based on rejecting the command and on strict observance of the rule, coupled with prayer, austerity, silence, and manual work. Other abbeys followed the trend. The 18th century saw a Catholic renaissance in the whole of Europe. The great Baroque and classical buildings stand witness to the adjustments in monastic life, and this gave rise to an increase in vocations. Recent studies prove how intense spiritual life was, very different indeed from the reported myth of rich abbeys full of decadent, idle monks. Nevertheless, the spirit of enlightenment attacked the abbeys, declaring they were the symbol of obscurantism and uselessness. Joseph II probably laid down the most radical rules, but these were as nothing compared with the violence the abbeys suffered from the French Revolution. The French Revolution brought a real wave of persecution and systematic destruction of ecclesiastical goods. In France and in the Netherlands, the destruction of the abbeys was actually planned in 1796. Citeaux was razed to the ground, Clairvaux turned into a prison. The entire Cistercian order was suppressed, country after country, and most of the monasteries were secularized. By the early 19th century, only a few rare communities were left. Feeling threatened, they went into hiding and lost heart. These few survivors were to become the starting point of a real resurrection of Cistercian life. Nevertheless, owing to the havoc in their world, they could no longer recreate the former powerful and influential institutions. Henceforth, the abbeys would really have to live by their own work and adjust themselves to a society where misunderstanding and even hostility towards monasticism still existed. The 19th century Cistercian Renaissance was based on two different currents. The one, the strict observance Cistercian order, also called Trappists. The other, the common observance Cistercian order, regrouping many independent congregations. This distinction, rather subtle for the layman, still exists today, though efforts have been made to get closer together. The reason for this is historical and based on two different conceptions of contemplative life. The 20th century, with its two world wars, again upset the monastic institutions, and many abbeys were suppressed in countries under communist rule. At the same time, the two Cistercian orders have acquired a worldwide dimension through the foundation of monasteries in all the other continents. This dispersal proves the will of the contemplative orders to get involved with the missionary movement. The challenge of the Church in the 60s also shook the Cistercian orders and resulted in a vocational crisis. The General Chapter then took some very important decisions, abolishing the distinction between lay brothers and chair monks, adopting the vernacular for liturgical ceremonies, and accepting a pluralism based on fundamental observances. These decisions are still too recent for us to measure their importance, but there has been new growth in the number of monasteries, especially convents. In 1990, a total of 7,284 Cistercian monks and nuns occupied 317 houses scattered all over the world. About 2/3 of these belong to the strict observance order. Their spiritual life and material asceticism, sheltered from the world, is still based on the search for the absolute, just as it was in the 12th century. Their vocation has gone through fundamental adjustments, all of which goes to prove that the absolute is still at work in and through man and holds out the promise of redemption. In the 12th century, the area known as Belgium today consisted of a harmonious group of feudal principalities. The powerful Flanders was a vassal to the King of France, the Duchy of Brabant, the Principality of Liège, the counties and duchies of Namur, Hainaut, Limburg and Luxembourg were dependencies of the Holy Roman Empire. Cistercians first came to this country when the monks of Trois Fontaines took over the Benedictine Abbey of Orval, daughter house of Clairvaux, in the forest of Ardennes. In 1138, another Benedictine abbey, known as the Dune Abbey, joined the filiation of Clairvaux, together with the Savigny family. Villers Abbey was the first real Cistercian foundation in 1146, followed soon after by Aulne Abbey and then by Cambron Abbey, all three directly affiliated to Clairvaux. By then, the Benedictines were already quite widely implanted in Belgium. Another order, the Premonstratensians, became important in the north of Brabant. The new abbeys for men, Terdoust, Val-Dieu and Val-Saint-Lambert, were only built towards the end of the 12th century, and the first nuns' monastery at Herkenrode in 1182. During the first half of the 13th century, that's to say relatively late, the Cistercian order reached its full development. The many foundations of abbeys for nuns, all affiliations of villas in the Liège diocese, are proof of its importance. The late Middle Ages, including the brilliant Burgundian era in the 15th century, was not an auspicious period for Cistercian foundations. The 16th and 17th centuries, under Spanish rule, were noted for the religious wars and continual conflicts with France that laid waste vast stretches of the country and brought much suffering to the abbeys. Some, like the Abbey of Dune or Baudelot, moved, for safety's sake, into the cities of Bruges and Ghent. This explains why we had to wait until the 18th century to discover most of the Cistercian patrimony in Belgium. This century was a time of both prosperity and peace under Austrian rule. The reforms of the Emperor Joseph II led to the first suppressions, and the French Revolution put an end to monastic life, both in the Austrian Netherlands and the Principality of Liège. As soon as times improved, and the constitution of the Belgian state in 1830 guaranteed freedom of religion and associations, the Cistercians founded new abbeys. Westmalle Abbey near Antwerp, founded by Valsaint in 1794, played a decisive part in spreading the reform of La Trappe in Belgium, namely to Achel, to Saint-Sixte and to Scourmont. Of the 18 monastic communities that existed before the Revolution, only 2 were reconstituted, Saint-Bernard on the Scheldt and Val-Dieu. At the time of the Third French Republic, many communities of nuns fled to find refuge in Belgium. Eventually, 2 abbeys were allowed to rebuild on their original sites, Rochefort in 1885 and Orval in 1926. The rebuilding of the new Orval beside the ruins of the very first Belgian Cistercian abbey is of especially great symbolic value and expresses the spiritual permanency of the Order of St. Bernard. And this is equally obvious, in a different way maybe, in the splendid ruins of the abbeys at Villers, Dunes and Ulm. Today, there are 12 abbeys in Belgium following the strict observance rule, 6 Trappist abbeys and 6 Trappistine abbeys, as well as 6 abbeys following the common observance rule, 2 Cistercian abbeys for monks and 4 Cistercian or Bernardine abbeys for nuns. Monks are men in search of spiritual perfection here on earth. They live ascetic lives in community, apart from society, guided by an abbot and following a rule. They are also called cenobites. Little is known about the origins of Christian monasticism, but as early as the second half of the 3rd century, there were hermits living a life of reclusion in the Egyptian desert. Among these fathers of the desert, the most famous was Saint Anthony. At the same time, the first experiments in community life were made, and the first set of rules, such as Saint Pachome's or Saint Basil's for monastic life, appeared in the 4th century. Some monasteries still extant in Egypt and in the Near East can be traced back to those early days. Early in the 4th century, the monastic ideal spread throughout the Roman Empire, in Rome, to Provence and to Gaul, thanks incidentally to the influence of Saint Martin of Tours. From the 5th to the 7th century, the movement developed in Celtic Ireland and in Scotland, pushed by St. Patrick, then on the continent with St. Columba. In the 6th century, European monastic life was swept by different undercurrents. Saint Benedict played a particularly important part. His Benedictine rule, written at the Mount Cassino Abbey in Italy, started a reform that was progressively adopted by the entire Western monastic world and was to bring about the conversion of England and of the Meuse and the Rhine areas. The Council of Aachen in 817 imposed compliance with the rule of Saint Benedict to all monasteries in the Carolingian Empire. During the next century, in the throes of upheavals caused by the Norse and Hungarian invasions, and despite serious destruction, abbeys in the West played a vital part in saving Western culture and Christian religion. From the foundation of the abbey at Cluny in 909 rose an impressive reform revival. So, in exactly 1.5 centuries, this Burgundian abbey was at the head of a well-organized, powerful and prosperous order. By the end of the 11th century, there was a new urge for reform towards more spiritual authenticity. In this context, we find the reforms of St. Bruno, founder of the first charter house in 1084, of St. Robert of Molem, who built Citeaux in 1098, or of St. Norbert, who founded the Premonstratensians in 1120. Very few churches and some rare cells have survived as evidence of the architecture of monasteries in the early days of the Holy Roman Empire and in the late Middle Ages. Dating from Carolingian times, a very important document has been preserved. It's a theoretical plan of a Benedictine abbey kept in the St. Gall Abbey in Switzerland. It dates from 820-830 and follows the ideas of reform connected with the Aachen Council. The plan shows an ideal and organized complete building unit. The church, the traditional sites around the cloister, the wing reserved for the novices, the sick and disabled, reception, the buildings having an industrial or farming function. This document, which was never realized, clearly shows that the planning concern of the monasteries is a very ancient compulsion and explains the uniformity already noticeable around the cloisters as from that time. Tenth and 11th century Benedictine abbeys are always built round the church and cloister and consist of different functional additions arranged in a more or less systematic, developed order according to the size of the community and the authority of the monastery. The case of Cluny and its 3 successive stages of development reveals the structures of the abbey that was to become the greatest abbey in the entire West. All the Cistercians did was to take over the heritage and improve on it in terms of their specificity, and by systemizing it to an extreme degree. Cistercian abbeys were usually built in places selected according to precise standards and a systematic plan. Relatively few instructions pertaining to the actual building have been found, but the many abbeys that remain, and even the excavated ruins, have given sufficient evidence of the strict planning from which, according to some, a typical plan has emerged. The Cistercians always chose sites away from towns, in lonely forest areas, to avoid temptation. Aware of the importance of water, source of all life, they settled in the valleys, beside a stream or a river, making sure its flow was regular and abundant, to work the mills, fill the fish ponds, empty the sewers, and fertilize the land in all seasons. To them, a valley was a symbol of fertilization, thanks to the rain bestowed by divine grace. Many are the names of Cistercian abbeys in which the words water and valley are included. Clairvaux, Trois Fontaines, Fontenay, Orval, Fountains, Molbronn, Rilvaux, Ripalta, Bronnbach, Fontevivo, Noirlac, Val-Saint-Lambert, Fontfroide, Val-Dieu, Clermarais, Vallée Crucis, Valmagne, etc. Other abbeys merely bear the name of the stream nearby, Alcobaça, Senanque, or of the bridge that spans it, Longpont, Pontigny. The chosen spot also had to provide arable land, woods and stone quarries for the building. That's why it wasn't exceptional to see a community suddenly leave their settlement the very first year of its foundation to seek a more favorable position. In fact, the definitive installation and stone buildings lent a distinctive character of eternity, and so the chosen spot had to meet requirements perfectly. The buildings of a Cistercian abbey always respected a symbolic east-west orientation. Those buildings with a spiritual function, such as the chancel or the monks' quarters, always faced the east. The buildings with a temporal function, such as storerooms or the lay brothers' quarters, were facing towards the west. The site for the church was usually chosen north of the cloister, but topographical reasons frequently made them build it on the south side. In the center of every main building surrounding the cloister, each room was used for a very specific purpose and had its precise location. It's fascinating to note how in Christian Europe, in the 12th and 13th centuries, all Cistercian abbeys were built to a similar pattern, from England to Italy, from Portugal to Hungary, thus demonstrating that monastic life was uniform and respected the same rule. The purity of form, the human proportions of space, the beauty of the chosen sites, and the amazing sameness found throughout Europe explain the interest roused by Cistercian architecture. Due to their aesthetic based on sobriety, Cistercian masterpieces express perfection and induce contemplation. The oldest buildings still standing were all built after the second third of the 12th century. The strictness of the founders, as well as the internal organization of the buildings, are obvious and reveal the daily life of those early times. Many times enlarged or rebuilt, most abbeys were progressively influenced by the Gothic style towards the end of the 12th century. Though the spirit of the order changed very little, the churches increased in height, grace, and light. It's not always easy to distinguish between Romanesque and Gothic in the secondary buildings, where dating is more often than not approximate. From the early 13th century, Gothic definitely asserted itself, while still following quite strictly the original plan and layout of the buildings. Cistercian architecture doesn't only consist of churches and cloisters, but also includes the other monastic buildings and everything built on the whole estate, such as country barns, for instance. Each demonstrates in its own way the spirit of eternity that the builders always suggest in their work. The church is the most important building of an abbey, not only because of its size, but because of its function as temple of the Lord. The monks assemble in it 7 times a day to sing divine services and to celebrate the Eucharist. The features of churches built by Cistercians in the 12th century are a regular plan and a style reduced to essentials. The geometry of their volume, the purity of their spaces, and the quality of their acoustics are striking. The search for perfection in simplicity has produced a fair number of real masterpieces, of which, unfortunately, not all have been preserved. The churches are always orientated, that is, the chancel always looks towards the rising sun, the east. Following the plan, they consist of a nave flanked by side aisles, a transept, projecting onto which were built towards the east small side chapels and a shallow chancel ending in a flat chevet. In front of the façade, which is the smallest screen wall, there is often a narthex, or low transition space towards the exterior. In height, simplicity remains supreme. Towers are forbidden, and there are no galleries above the side aisles. Most of the time, the churches are vaulted with stone barrel vaults. With Gothic structures, elliptical arches were introduced. The walls had small bay openings contrasting with the matching compositions of the chancel windows or the rose window of the façade. Nevertheless, there were definite variants in the shape of the chancel. The chevet wasn't always flat, but could be a polygonal or semicircular apse. In the middle of the 12th century, ambulatories were added in the large abbeys, with chapels radiating from them, as in the new chancel at Clairvaux. Or else, the chevet was surrounded by an increased number of secondary chapels, as in the new chancel at Cîteaux. But there is no doubt that the most characteristic phenomenon is the admirable homogeneity noticeable in all the daughter churches of Clairvaux built during the first half of the 12th century. Apparently, the influence of St. Bernard urged architects to call the flat chevet plain Bernardine. The best preserved example of this is Fontenay Abbey in Burgundy. In the second half of the 12th and especially during the 13th centuries, Cistercian churches were built bigger and bigger. Often they were completely rebuilt, using Gothic structure to ensure greater height and better lighting, until they began to look like small cathedrals. And yet, the original ideal persisted. The relative absence of ornament and figurative decoration, both in sculpture and in painting, or in the abstract stained glass windows. Furniture and equipment was also reduced to the strict minimum. The altars were made of stone and the monks' stalls of wood. A timber screen separated nave from chancel. In many cases, the organ was supported on the screen in an ideal central position between the monks' chancel to the east and the lay brothers to the west. A special place was also kept for the novices and the sick. The floor was paved with colored flagstones so that it looked like a real carpet. The walls were coated with paint and the column capitals were enhanced by a few polychromic finishing touches.
The Cistercians chose a site south of the plateau of Brabant for their abbey. It is a loess region, half sand, half clay, noted for the huge stretches of farmland in hilly, undulating country. Rich and heavy soil fields, suitable for growing cereal and for the most part used for sugar beet. The mean altitude is about 150 meters, and the region is crossed by rivers that sometimes hollow out deeply embanked valleys. The rivers are part of the Dial Basin, itself part of the Scheldt drainage basin. In the 12th century, the country must have been well timbered, but clearing for cultivation wasn't done only by the monks. As a matter of fact, the old Roman road from Bavay to Cologne runs just a few kilometers south of the abbey, and the Latin etymology villa recurs in the name of the abbey, Villus Abbey, taking us back to the agricultural past of Gallo-Roman times. The medieval domains, Marbais and Sombref, practiced clearing in many localities before the monks' arrival. From a political view, Villus Abbey was built on the borders of the powerful Duchy of Brabant and of the County of Namur. Though the first land donations came from Marbais lords, vassals to the Count of Namur, the abbey very soon turned to the Dukes of Brabant for protection, and this is borne out by their adding their benefactor's name to theirs, Villus en Brabant. Today, the abbey is under the jurisdiction of Villers-la-Ville, a Walloon commune in Belgium. The final spot selected to build Villus Abbey was both well chosen and spectacular. It is a very hilly undulation in which the River Thiel flows between rocky slate as it curves into a double bend. The local stone was used for building, and the abundance of the stream joined by two small brooks greatly contributed to the development of the monastery. Though in the steep valley, The abbey was built according to Cistercian norms as to the relative position of the building. The monks solved the problem of space due to the narrowness of the valley. They vaulted the river and built the abbey on a vast artificial level surface. In the course of time, the vaulting was extended to 273 meters, an impressive length. The monks arranged ponds and built mills in the valley, both upstream and downstream. The harnessing of the Til at Phyllis and the whole system of underground canalization is one of the most spectacular hydraulic achievements in the Cistercian world. The monks built an outer wall with gates round the abbey. It was extended and reinforced many times. Beyond the walls, there were hardwood forests right up to the top of the plateau. On the south side only, a huge meadow stretched out as far as the farm. The choice of the abbey for that site is ascribed to St. Bernard personally, according to the chronicles. It presents all the features of the most beautiful Cistercian implantations. Villers-en-Brabant is one of the greatest Cistercian abbeys in Europe, still presenting one of the most complete complexes of medieval buildings in spite of its being a ruin. The layout of the first buildings, dating from its foundation in 1146, hasn't outlived time. The medieval building, the ruins of which still stand, date from the very end of the 12th century and the first half of the 13th century. The oldest among them are Romanesque, but progressively, as early as the first quarter of the 13th century, the Romanesque made way for the new Gothic structures, more streamlined and better provided with light. This entrancing evolution is particularly noticeable in the church. The homogeneous complex is the result of the severe design that distinguishes all Cistercian buildings. The main material used was shale stone taken from the quarries found within the outer wall of the abbey. The different main structures were well orientated round the cloister: the church, the monks' quarters, the refectory, the lay brothers' wing, respectively built to the north, east, south, and west. The big church and the refectory are particularly eye-catching. Beyond the perimeter of the cloister, other relics from the 13th century are still extant, such as a portion of the mill, the main entrance to the abbey, the infirmary, the prisons, quite a few cellars, and the brewery, which originally served as guest house. Visiting all these medieval components greatly helps in understanding the daily life of the monks at Villers in the 13th century. That is, at the time of its apogee, both spiritual and temporal.
Oh.